Okay, our topic for our notes today is the Crusades. This is a topic that you explored in your religion and crusade station during our medieval life station, so hopefully some of this will be a little bit familiar to you. Before we get started, I want to ask you just a couple of questions to just get you thinking about the current state of Europe at this time. So historically, what problems or issues would make it difficult for a kingdom to survive? And then thinking about our stations from earlier this week, were there any stations that could have been harmful to the feudal system or made it difficult for the feudal system to continue? Some of the stations that may come to mind might be the plague, very deadly and contagious. It killed many, many people. And you can think about how this would affect jobs that people had. What people in particular were more likely to die, right? You might think about how the peasants or poor people were more likely to die. And then if all of your peasants and serfs are dying off, what is that going to mean for the rest of the feudal system? And the Crusades, how could a long-term war affect people and a society? So think about, why do wars begin, first of all? What are some of the things that people might disagree on? What are some issues that may arise that people might feel so passionately about that they might go to war for? And if religion comes to mind for you, you're exactly right. So we're going to see a series of really up to 9 crusades that take place. We'll kind of take a closer look at the first few. Here's sort of a map here that you can see who was in control of what territory was sort of Christian territory or Roman Catholic territory, and what territories were mostly Muslim or Islamic. So much of Western Europe up here you see is controlled by Christians, and a lot of the Middle East and Northern Africa regions are controlled by the Muslims. And the city in question is going to be this city over here, the Kingdom of Jerusalem, or the City of Jerusalem, and that is really what this whole war is going to be over. So what is a crusade? A crusade is a holy war. The Crusades that we're going to be referring to is the holy war between European Christians and the Muslim Turks. So when we talked about the Ottoman Turks in our Byzantine Empire unit, they were Muslims. So we are talking about Muslims fighting against Christians. And what are they fighting over? The Christians and the Muslims are fighting over control of the city of Jerusalem. And Jerusalem is a city in the country of Israel. And so they were fighting over control over Jerusalem. So you may wonder, what is the significance of Jerusalem? Why is this city so important to each side that they're willing to go to war for it? And to Christians, this is the place where Jesus was crucified or died and then ascended to heaven. And then according to Muslims, this is the place where Muhammad, the founder of their religion, also ascended to heaven. So for both Christians and Muslims, Jerusalem is considered the most important and the holiest city to their religion, really their closest connection that they have to God. So for a while, Jerusalem is going to be controlled by Muslims, and 600 Muslims come into the city and take it over, but they allow Christians to visit. So while Muslims do control the city, they still are welcoming and allow Christians to visit Jerusalem for spiritual trips, pilgrimage, that sort of thing. However, eventually in 1095, we're going to see a new group of Muslims that come in and take control of Jerusalem, and they sort of shut off the city to all Christians. They do not allow Christians to visit. They do not attend Christians to come for a holy pilgrimage, and eventually start invading other cities like Constantinople. Remember our Ottoman Turks, this is them. And so the Byzantine emperor writes to Pope Urban, who's really the leader of the Catholic Church or the Christians, and asks for help. He says, we are being invaded by Muslims, they are taking over, and we need some help. We need some support. And so Pope Urban responds to the call for help, and he reads the letter asking for help, and he calls for a holy war or a crusade. He says that those who will fight and die in the Crusades are going to be promised a spot in heaven with all sins forgiven. And so at this time, that's really convincing. That's really all the people need to say, yes, sign me up. And so we see about 30,000 men take him up on this offer and leave Europe to go fight in Jerusalem. So why would people fight? In addition to kind of what I just mentioned, the promises that the Pope made, knights, you learned in your stations, they were ready to use their fighting skills. This is something that they practiced often. They were doing a lot of mock battles and simulations, and they were sort of ready to have a worthy battle or a worthy cause worth fighting for. And then peasants or serfs, this is sort of a chance to escape their dreary life, their life in the feudal system on the bottom. The Pope has promised that if they die while fighting, they're going to be welcomed into heaven. And so they sort of see it as a chance to control their destiny or their fate outside of the feudal system. So some outcomes of the Crusades. There's going to be a lot of back and forth. The Muslims start by controlling Jerusalem. Christians are going to take it over. Then the Muslims are going to take it back. They're going to maintain control for a little while, and then they're going to take it back. So we have a lot of back and forth between control over the city, hence why there are multiple crusades that occur. But ultimately, the Muslims are sort of going to remain victorious, and they'll maintain control over the city of Jerusalem for the time being. So some major impacts of the Crusades. Number one, it's really a big reason why we see such a decline in feudalism. We see serfs are able to leave their land. They start seeking new opportunities. And then in addition, we see an increase in trade. So trade and movement of goods and ideas throughout the Middle East starts to increase. And then Europe also starts to gain a lot of new knowledge. We start to learn new things from Muslims and the Arab nations, science, astronomy, the numeric system. And so really, ultimately, this increase in trade and learning is what's going to spark something called the Renaissance, which we'll kind of get to next in our unit. So when we talk about war, it's important for us to talk about about this word perspective. What perspective is, the way that people or individuals see or view things, and why that's important. Because really in any given situation, you're going to have a lot of different viewpoints. You're going to have a lot of different people who see things or justify things differently. So the two major perspectives of the Crusades is going to be that of the Christians and the perspective of Muslims, and sort of how they see the Crusades and why they're fighting. Historically, Muslims kind of see this like they're defending their land. They had control over Jerusalem, and they see Christians as brutal invaders that are just sort of coming in out of nowhere and invading them, and they're just sort of innocently trying to defend the land that belonged to them. Christians, on the other hand, though, believe that they're fighting this battle, these crusades in the name of Jesus, and that they are trying to honor him and live up to his glory. So they see this as this like glorious rejoicing and celebrating of their devotion to their sort of leader within their religion, whereas Muslims really just feel like they're being innocently attacked. So I'm going to leave you guys here. Feel free to rewind and rewatch any parts of the video if I move too fast. Otherwise, if there is still time remaining, you can go ahead and update your snapshot for the Crusade section.